4, 3, 2, we have ignition. Commit liftoff. We have liftoff.
When I look back to the period of time when our crew, it's Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and myself, when we got assigned to a crew, it was going to be the second Apollo mission. And the first Apollo mission was Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. We had the same kind of spacecraft.
I'm taking over a mission that my buddy was not able to fly. That was a tough one. So with that, we went through a lot of trauma. Gus would be the first person to say, let's get on with it. Do good work. And that was the kind of attitude I had going into Apollo.
Apollo 7 became very important. If we had not had a success on Apollo 7, we really don't know what would have happened to the space program.
Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for a great new American enterprise. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth.
What happened with Apollo was an amazing series of events. We're trying to get to the moon before this decade is out. If you remember what Mr. Kennedy told us.
We were smart enough to realize that going into space is different than just going up to 40,000 feet or going supersonic, down to those kind of things. And that's what appealed to us. I think that we wanted to be part of that.
We didn't mind working 80 hours a week because we knew we were going to do something different.
Apollo 7 was in Earth orbit for 11 days. Today I would tell people about this. That was the longest, it was the most ambitious, and the most successful first test flight of any new flying machine ever. And it's still true today, 50 years later.
In its complexity and in its application, that it has never been duplicated. That happened, 2 generations ago.
What made it work was the teamwork that developed and the understanding of who was responsible for what.
We as a team worked, everyone worked, so it showed that equality was necessary. We learned so much in science, space technology, computers much smaller, semiconductors. All of this was from the space program.
Back then the objective was to get there. Now our objective is to stay there. We're going to go with a sustainable architecture.
The next frontier is going to have to be Mars. And there will come a time when humans will go to Mars.
Given a clear goal, I think humanity can accomplish anything.
Listen to the words of 3 men flying around the moon.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you.
Well, Apollo 8 originally was an Earth orbital mission exercising a lunar module, but the lunar module was way behind.
We had intelligence information that the Russians were going to put a man around the moon, probably in December of 1968.
The people in NASA came up with the idea of moving Apollo 8 to a lunar orbital mission.
Why don't we send the command service module of Apollo 8 to orbit the moon, and we can learn a lot about the communication system, the navigation system, how the moon's gravity would affect the orbiting spacecraft, look for suitable landing spots.
So we had to condense into 4 months what usually took a year to 18 months of training. Everybody was motivated. Everybody was dedicated. And the basic idea was to beat the Russians to the moon. That was a political goal that was set by President Kennedy, and we were all determined to beat it.
Apollo 8 developed a lot of attention. It filled a big square in preparation for later Apollo flights.
Well, I got into the big Saturn V. This would be the first time that man had actually launched on a Saturn V. So I thought to myself after this 4 months of heavy training, I said, you know, I'm actually going to go to the moon.
The engines are on. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Well, the Saturn V still is the most powerful machine ever made, and for 17 missions it flew perfectly.
We have cleared the tower.
We had orbited the Earth, first of all, to check our spacecraft out. Then, when everything was fine and the spacecraft looked fine to go to the moon, we lit the third stage for a second time.
Trajectory and guidance are go, over.
We could actually coast all the way to the moon.
And after a while, you could look back and see the Earth getting smaller and smaller.
Apollo 8, this is Houston. Roger. Good to hear your voice.
People on Earth tend to call the far side of the moon the dark side, but that's a misnomer. On our flight, the moon was between the Earth and the sun, and the far side was lit by the sun.
We saw the far side. You know, we were like three school kids looking into a candy store window, I guess, just staring at the unnamed craters as they slowly passed us by.
We were busy shooting pictures of the lunar surface for lunar landing sites for upcoming lunar landings. And then suddenly I looked out the window and here was this gorgeous orb coming up, and I thought, holy moly.
And there over the lunar landscape was the Earth. The Earth was beautiful. It was the only thing in the whole universe that had any color.
I had fought to have a long lens and color film. I didn't have a light meter, just banged off a dozen or so pictures, changing the f-stop each click.
I put my thumb up to the window of the spacecraft, and I could completely hide the Earth behind my thumb. The Earth is a mere speck in the Milky Way galaxy. Look what we have here. Water and an atmosphere. We're orbiting a star just at the proper distance to absorb that star's energy. God has given mankind a stage upon which to perform. How the play turns out is up to us.
For all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
It's important for America to be at the forefront of space exploration. That drives technology. One of the important facets of the Apollo program was the coordination and the organization of the American industry to achieve a great goal. That we need to be a world leader, not just on the Earth, but in space.
We were that first crew that was going to get a chance to fly this vehicle and test this vehicle that was going to take human beings to the moon. We were very, very aware of the time pressure, and everything has to go right if we're for sure going to meet Kennedy's goal of getting to the moon in that decade and back. Apollo 9 was an engineering mission from beginning to end. We tested every possible thing that could be tested. The mission was completely dedicated to testing the systems, the engines, and the guidance and navigation, all kinds of things that we could do in Earth orbit.
So when we first got into orbit, we had a lot of stuff to do. And so we needed to make sure that we had all the data we could get. The lunar module had to land on the moon. I mean, that's what it was designed for. And then it had to get back up to the command module so there was a ride home.
How does that sports car handle, Jim? Pretty nice.
It's really very difficult to get the coordinate system in your head. Normally we docked looking out this way, and for the docking with the lunar module, you had to look out this way. So the control system didn't operate the way it normally would.
It was the most complicated, messy system of springs and levers and latches and unbelievably complex.
We depressurized both the lunar module and the command module, and Rusty was going to get out and transfer over to the command module. And we were doing that to see that it could be done.
I'm partway up the front of the lunar module, making sure that I could safely do that and not poke holes in the suit with the antennas and things. And everything was quiet. Nobody was talking. That beautiful Earth out there, I mean, that's when I really saw just the beauty of where I was.
Now, Dave wanted to get out of the spacecraft too, so part of the mission was for him to open up the hatch. So we were all out there in a vacuum.
Here we are at this historic moment that we're all part of, not just the astronauts, but everybody who's alive today, and we're all on this small planet as representative of life. We're beginning to move out from this planet, which, as far as we know, contains all of the life in our little corner of the universe. It just worked beautifully. I mean, it was an amazing vehicle.
It was a hell of a ride.
Simply stated, the purpose of the Apollo 10 flight is a final test of the men and machines required to do the lunar landing mission.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 10, you can tell the world that we have arrived.
And they give a Silver Snoopy for Excellence Award. I wanted to honor the people that had worked so hard, so we called it Snoopy. Well, you needed two names, so naturally the other one was Charlie Brown. You're amazed at what you see. The one thing that always amazed me were the size of the boulders. There were these gigantic craters, and down at the bottom would be boulders, and up on the rim would be boulders. using the Hasselblad cameras to give the highest resolution available then, and the radar was going. So radar mapped, photo mapped, and visually mapped. We're coming down, going upside down and backwards to retrograde. I heard the thruster start to fire. Or just bang, bang, bang. So what I did, the staging switch was here, raised the thing, and boom, stage it. In the meanwhile, I went to hard stops. But I got it back under control, and we made the maneuver. Came back and did a perfect rendezvous. One thing people always ask, were you frightened? Were you scared? The answer is no. They were fighter pilots, test pilots, so we knew what risks were. You did everything you could to mitigate the risk, but there was a risk. And so we understood that. Well, we had a series of debriefings with them because we had all the procedures worked out. In fact, I remember I went to Neil, I says, buddy, here you are. Here's all the techniques, all the procedures down to the last 50,000 feet. And you take it there, hard descent on the surface, 50,000 feet up, it's all done. So they just followed all the procedures we had. We made it back from the moon to the Earth in 42 hours. It was 24,791 miles an hour, or in Mach numbers, Mach 36. Or if you want to be precise scientifically, it was 0.0037% of the speed of light. So we were flat moving.
Okay, let's go there, Capcom on the hot fire. Okay, all flight controllers going around the horn, gonna go for undocking. Okay, Retro, go. Fido, go. Guide, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. Jinsei, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go. Capcom, we're go for undocking.
Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins arrived at the moon on Saturday, July 19th.
When we did get close and we rolled out and saw it for the first time, it was a revelation. It was gigantic. It filled our entire window.
The next day, Sunday, July 20th, was landing day.
In a lot of anticipation, we finally come to the day, the moment that this is about to commence.
Landing on the moon was absolutely the most difficult piece of any Apollo mission, okay? Think about it as a controlled fall out of lunar orbit. The problem is, in this controlled fall out of orbit, you only have enough fuel for one try.
Capcom, we're go for landing. Altitude 4,200.
Houston, you're a go for landing, over.
The trajectory had been wrong. They were targeted into this inhospitable place. Then they had to fly over this area at a high forward velocity, then pitch up to slow down so that kill their forward velocity, and then start down like a helicopter. So now we're critical fuel state. And that's why the 60-second call was given, and then the 30-second call.
Then I really got nervous, was calling out 25 seconds of fuel left, and then 20 seconds of fuel. Oh, jeez.
Okay, engine stop. APA at a descent. Mode control both auto, descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in. We copy you down, Eagle. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
The landing to me was a great celebration. The nation was almost euphoric.
Well, it proved that the United States could accomplish tremendous goals if they worked together as a team.
happened here. We had everything in the world drop out. We got 3 fuel cell lights, an AC bus light, a fuel cell disconnect, AC bus overload 1 and 2, main bus A and B out. Apollo 12 Houston, try FCE to auxiliary, over. NCE to auxiliary. What the hell is that? FCE to auxiliary. Apollo 12 Houston, try to reset your fuel cells now. Okay, I have a good GDC and Al has got the fuel cells back on and we'll be working on our AC buses. And that may have been a small one for Neil, but that's a long one for me. Countdown for BIM impact. 3, 2, 1, mark. Hello, Houston, Apollo 12, en route home. We're getting a spectacular view of heat clips. Hey, Houston, we've had a problem here. Can say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
It was plagued by bad omens and bad luck from the very beginning.
Looks good here, flight. Good agreement.
Years before the flight, when the spacecraft was being built, a damaged liquid oxygen tank was installed in the spacecraft. The tank had been dropped on the factory floor. A little piece of plumbing had prevented the normal procedure for removing oxygen after a routine test prior to the flight. And then on the day before flight, we filled up the tank again with liquid oxygen, and it was a bomb waiting to go off.
This is the crew of Apollo 13, wishing everybody there a nice evening, and we're just about ready to close out our inspection of Aquarius and get back for a pleasant evening at Odyssey. Good night.
Actually, it was the end of the workday. We were fixing to go to bed after we did a few things to clean up, and the next morning go into lunar orbit and get ready to land. And then it was a large bang.
When the explosion first occurred, we didn't know what happened.
And that just rang through the metallic structure.
Houston, we've had a problem.
I was in the lunar module, and then I went down into the command module.
We may have had an instrumentation problem, flight.
Roger. And we had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning there.
We started to look at the instrument panels. One of the quantity gauges of one of the tanks was 0. That was the tank that had blew. I then looked out the window and saw escaping at a high rate of speed, a gaseous oxygen, because the explosion occurred on the damaged tank, but that also ruptured the second tank, just blew the entire side of the spacecraft off.
My immediate feeling was just a sick feeling of pit of my stomach of disappointment. I knew we had lost the landing.
And from then on, it was not a third landing on the moon, but a survival of how to get home.
Okay, I want you to double check my arithmetic to make sure we got a good course of line.
Go flight. How's the arithmetic? Stand by, we're checking.
At the time, it's scary as the devil, and we were handling something that we knew was out of control. And every team that came on was dealing with a major set of problems to deal with. They just jumped to the task, and they knew what they had to do.
Okay, now let's everybody keep cool. We got the LEM still attached. The LEM spacecraft's good, so if we need to get back home, we got a LEM to do a good portion of it with.
One of the biggest things we had to do in the dying moments of the electrical system in the command module was to transfer the guidance system and transfer the angle numbers from the command module to the lunar module. And we only had about 15 minutes to do that.
About 20 minutes after the explosion, it was obvious that we weren't coming to a landing in the moon. We were going to go around it. Glenn had already been down in the trench with trajectory guys and came up with 5 trajectory return to Earth options. So we would have missed the Earth had we done nothing. So the first thing was to get us in the right direction to go around the moon. And that was the first maneuver we made. We used the landing engine, the engine we normally would land it on the moon. Everybody seemed to be moving in the right directions without being directed. Everybody had a sense of what had to be done. The training guys brought the simulators up over there, and the crews were over in the simulators tracking virtually everything they were doing. Every configuration change that was proposed to be done was already being worked over in the simulators there. So you started getting answers from all these various directions. The command module was very wet. There was water everywhere. In the LEM, there's no inner walls, so you could see water on all the connectors, wire bundles, plumbing, every turn, a glob of water. And the command module, we actually had to get towels out to wipe off the instrument panel to see the instruments.
We copied that report from Jim Lovell of service module separation at 138 hours.
And there's one whole side of that spacecraft missing.
Is that right? Okay, copy that. Farewell, Aquarius, and we thank you.
So it was a question of getting this entire world geared and oriented to one single job: get the crew home.
Teamwork was necessary. Good leadership, initiative to think outside of the box when things go wrong, how do we repair them? Those are the 3 things that were absolutely necessary.
I was most proud of being in this team that knew what they had to do, and there was no doubt about it. The team completely faced up to what had to be done. In this case, it was a survival challenge that we were faced with. So there you are, we pulled that off.
On the lunar surface, you have the ability to gather samples that can tell us so much about the origins of our solar system, and the samples returned gave us that information. That was what Apollo 14 did that was so trailblazing.
Looks good here, flight. Good agreement.
Well, we better back off here and think about this one, Houston. Roger.
They continue to believe that this mission might never get started, and Mission Control was pretty convinced it wouldn't either. First attempt, dock, couldn't get a hard dock. Second attempt, third attempt, fourth attempt, fifth, and a sixth attempt. 2 hours. But it's that spirit in Mission Control, in the crew, the faith and the confidence in their training, and they're able to work together as a team to get that mission going.
I believe I got a hard dock, Houston. Roger, Al, that's great. Super job, Stu. This is really a wild place up here.
In the aftermath of Apollo 13, nothing was taken for granted. It took a lot of work back home to really reprogram that software, to really understand what had happened there.
We're on the surface. Okay, we made a good landing. That was a beautiful one. We landed the slope, but other than that, we're in great shape. Yep. Right on the landing site. Looks like you're about on the bottom step and on the surface. Bedford, old man. Hamill's on the surface, and it's been a long way, but we're here.
Apollo 14 was an incredibly ambitious scientific mission. One of the things they had with them that was incredibly important was something called the MET, or the rickshaw. Basically a cart intended to carry both those scientific experiments, those payloads, but also to return those lunar samples. And so that allowed that crew to travel further from the lander than any crew had previously.
We're really going up a pretty steep slope here. We got a ways to go yet.
Like any good navigator, the astronauts brought with them the maps that they needed. But there was a problem with these maps. These maps had been shot from the air, and on the ground, that lunar landscape looked quite a bit different.
Nothing like being up to your armpits in lunar dust.
They found themselves in valleys that were deeper than they thought. They found themselves working up hills that were higher. This was an exploration at its finest.
Well, I'm going to try a little sand trap shot here. That looked like a slice to me, Al. Here we go. And one more. Miles and miles and miles.
The samples returned from Apollo 14 were incredibly important. They told us so much about the formation of the solar system, so much about the material that makes up the moon.
Okay, shall do a loop. Okay, make it smooth. And around we go. Show us a little style.
The return trip to Earth was a time to rest, a time to reflect, but also a time to continue science. A major portion of that journey home was conducting microgravity science, something that today we do on the International Space Station every day. That was really a new way to think about what would the value of space be. Apollo 14 achieved all the science that it had hoped to achieve, and it pressed the boundaries of space exploration in ways that future crews would build upon. And as we prepare to go back to the moon, we definitely follow in the footsteps of these brave crews that went before us and build upon the scientific information that they returned.
Internal, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, ignition sequence start, engines on, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1,
Apollo 15 was launched 50 years ago on July the 26th, 1971. It was a relatively big step from the previous 3 missions. As President Nixon stated, it would be the most ambitious scientific exploration in space at that time. The 3 astronauts were Commander David Scott, Command Module Pilot Al Worden, and Lunar Module Pilot Jim Irwin. The Lunar Rover was an electrically driven, bare-bones car to allow the astronauts to cover much greater distance on the Moon than the previous 3 flights could accomplish.
This is really a rock and roll ride, isn't it? Never been on a ride like this before. Oh boy.
It had a top speed of about 8 miles an hour, although I think in later flights they actually cranked that up to about 11 miles an hour. Scott and Irwin spent 3 days exploring the Apennine-Hadley region in the Lunar Rover. There's actually a plaque on the Lunar Rover vehicle that was left on the Moon that says, "Man's first wheels on the Moon." The heavy focus on science for Apollo 15 was its primary feature. It was achieved 2 ways. One, of course, with the Lunar Rover vehicle on the Moon to gather more lunar data. And secondly, the Command Service Module carried a sim bay of scientific instruments that allowed Al Worden to gather many photographs and much data as he circled the Moon for his 3 days in orbit. One of the interesting experiments that Scott performed on the Moon was to demonstrate Galileo's theory that 2 objects will always drop at the same rate in an airless environment.
For our Falcon, and I'll drop the 2 of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that?
Scott and Irwin, while they were doing their lunar rock studies on the Moon, came across a single rock that was determined to be over 4 billion years old. It was called the Genesis Rock. Scott and Irwin spent over 18 hours on the Moon, the longest time of any of the Apollo missions at that time, and gathered 170 pounds of lunar material to bring back. They also set out the Apollo Lunar Experiments package. In a private moment, Commander David Scott laid a small aluminum statue of an astronaut on the Moon to memorialize the 14 astronauts that had died in the US and Soviet programs. The Lunar Rover had a TV camera on it, and for the first time we were privileged to see the ascent stage take off from the Moon. After Scott and Irwin were back in the command module, they continued to orbit the Moon for 2 days, and during that time deployed the particle and field satellite. During the flight back to Earth, one of the most important tasks required of the crew was for Al Worden to EVA from the command module and capture the cassettes that recorded all the data that he'd accumulated during his orbits of the Moon. That was the first time at 197,000 miles from Earth that a man had ever done a deep space EVA. During re-entry, the burning reaction control system fuel burned through the risers of one of the chutes, and that chute streamed and effectively became about 1/5 of its normal capacity. Apollo 15 landed on 2 chutes. It was designed to do that, but it did mean a hard landing, but a safe landing. Apollo 15 broke several records. The first use of the Lunar Rover, the first deep space walk by Al Worden, the heaviest payload in lunar orbit at 107,000 pounds, and the longest crewed lunar mission of 295 hours. Apollo 15 achieved all of its objectives and accumulated a wealth of scientific information.